Hello everyone, we're continuing with Swamiji's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. I'm a little surprised every time I open it now because we're making our way through the pages. We're up to chapter 6 of the Gita, but we're much more than halfway through we're farther along in the book than we are in the Gita itself. So let us start now with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence, your guiding inspiration in the words and commentary of this great scripture. We are deeply sincere in our desire to live closely with Thee. Help us to understand in every moment Thy will for us, and give us the clarity, the energy, and the courage to live always in harmony with Thy will. Om. Peace. Amen. Let's just have a moment of silence and then we'll start. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay. We are in the chapter called the True Yoga, which is chapter, chapter 18 of Swami's commentary, which is chapter 6 of the Gita. So we are on chapter 6, verse 6. And here's what it says. For him whose lower egoic self has been conquered by the higher self, that self is the friend of his lower self. The true self, however, is not friendly to the false self and is in many ways its enemy. Okay, for him whose lower egoic self has been conquered by the higher soul self, that self, meaning the soul self, is the friend of his lower self because he's serving his true interests. The true self, however, is not friendly to the false self and is in many ways its enemy. This is like the action, inaction sort of section. I can look at the capital S's and you can't, but still. Our whole discussion last session was about how oneself is his own greatest friend or oneself is one's greatest enemy, and now one's soul self is one's friend, and yet one's soul self is not one's friend, and it just goes on and on. Swami's comment, though, and this is the real point. See, the thing about the spiritual path and the thing about trying to put all this into words is it's very confusing. And in English especially, because there's only the word self, capital S, small s, we don't have exact Sanskrit words for it. It's much clearer in the original Sanskrit if you speak it, because there's exact words for all these variations of consciousness. But here's what Swami says. People are often stunned, that's the word he uses, stunned, by the severity with which great sages, who are ever the true friends of everyone's higher self, may sometimes treat them. A saint accepts worldly people more or less as they are, without concerning himself particularly over their foibles and defects. If, however, they show a glimmering of desire to know God, he may sometimes treat them with unexpected severity. If, moreover, they place themselves under him as disciples, he may seem to worldly eyes, or even to the unprepared disciple to behave toward them quite harshly. His job is not to pamper their egos, is to cauterize forever their ego, their egoic shortfalls, and make them pure vessels that can receive into themselves the supernal blessings of divine love and bliss. Well, there you have it, don't you? It's there was a period of time in Ananda's history. It's happened more than once, but it was a particularly dramatic time when we were in the middle of litigation, and the second lawsuit had started, which was the one that was an attempt to destroy Swami's character and to just denigrate everything about Ananda. That was the intention all the way through, but this was the particularly ugly one, where it was just pure character assassination, attacked on Swami, but also attacking on all of us for being so, such naive sheep in the face of this wolf-like creature who was their characterization of Swami entirely and absurdly false. But nonetheless, it created a certain kerfuffle. And in the context of that, this movement started. Let me sort of try to put this in better context. This was in the 90s, and during the 1990s, I believe every notable ashram in America and every notable teacher presenting the Indian teachings who was on the national stage, they were all attacked. Almost all of them were attacked for sexual misconduct, but then also other things came on. And it was devastating to the yoga movement and completely out of proportion is the only way I can say. There's a whole lot that can be said about it and should be said about it. Swami wrote an article for Yogi International or for Yoga Journal called Guru's Celibacy and Spiritual Practice or something like that, something similar. Very, very thoughtful article. The magazine said later they never got so much positive feedback for any article like they got for that one. Swami just excoriated people for being so immature in their understanding of the spiritual life. So what happened was Ananda stood in the face of it, and we took it to court all the way through. And Swami never stepped out of the public eye. In fact, he was especially public during that period of time. The response of others had been to go into seclusion. One very fine teacher simply left his own ashram. Those who were from India went back to India. Some died. It was quite a hard time. And one of the things that started it, and this is how Swami Kriyananda talked about it, one of the really wonderful ashrams with a wonderful teacher, there was this movement got started that we need to bring in more psychology into our spiritual life. We have to talk more about what we feel and what we want. I don't know how else to put it. And it's not as if that aspect of life is not important. Don't misunderstand me. But there comes a point in the spiritual path where you need to have a certain egoic integration. You have to have psychological health. You have to have psychological strength. Sometimes people who are somewhat fractured psychologically, and these things happen, that we're just in a stage of life where we're egoically fragile and we need to be supported. And it's a stage you have to go through, but it's a hard stage to go through. So sometimes people try to just skip right to ego surrender, because if I just surrender the ego, then I don't have to face the cracks in it. The interesting thing that I've observed is pretty simple, is that it doesn't work. Meaning, if you're motivated, if you're trying to avoid something, the spiritual path, if you follow it at all, will force you to face it. And because my span in one ashram is so long, 50 years, I've watched it happen. People will come in hoping to escape from something. And I don't mean escape from delusion, but escape from some aspect of themselves they don't want to grapple with, and sooner or later it's forced to the surface. Sometimes it can take 20 years. And if one has good karma, you'll face it, you'll resolve it, and then you'll stay on the path and move forward. Now, in the context of all of this, however, there's this sort of, there doesn't have to be an antithesis between psychological work and spiritual work, but there can be. Because there can be this sort of commitment to the egoic self that is contradictory to the commitment to transcend the egoic self. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes it comes out like that. Meaning sometimes people take a stand that make them feel like opposites. So that is sort of what happened to this ashram, and it didn't end well. And all of this is coming to a very simple point. And then in our community, see, one of the things that happened when I first came to Swamiji, and I was not alone in this, I was a bright girl, and I was used to being, one of the brighter people in the room. So I was pretty used to just being able to assert my point of view. I grew up, I was 15 when we left El Paso, Texas, and moved to Claremont, California. Claremont is a college town outside of Los Angeles. The Claremont College is Pomona College, Scripps College, Claremont Graduate School, Pitzer College. These are very well-established, higher-end schools, more competitive schools, however you'd put it. So the entire atmosphere of Claremont was filled with professors and people who were drawn to that kind of life, and it was a very, very good vibration for a person like me, because I was just in company. All my years in Texas, first my brother, especially my brother, who was really outstanding, but to an extent me also, we were just raised differently, and we were different than most of the people that we went to school with. And as a consequence, I got used to having my way because of that energy. It was mitigated a little in my last few years. But anyway, by the time I got to Swami, I was pretty strong in my own thoughts, and I had a lot of confidence in my own thinking, all to the good. But of course, much of my thinking was completely muddy and utterly confused. And Swamiji just straightened me out. I mean, he didn't straighten me out with a sledgehammer, but he just straightened me out. He straightened me out by his vibration and by his words, that I would just assert untruth that had no basis in real thinking. It was just my habit. And he would either gently correct it, intelligently correct it with interaction, or correct it sometimes with silence. He would just vibrate differently than what my thoughts were doing. And I grew sensitive to that. He didn't always have to tell me. I could just feel it. And over time, a lot of muddy thinking was cleared up. By no means all of it, but certainly a lot of it. And a lot of muddy thinking is just that you hear good ideas or ideas around you that sound like good ideas, and you just keep repeating them. And I hear people doing it, and it makes me a little nervous. So one of the things that happened during that period of time was that people started talking about the fact that Ananda should be a safe place. That was the words that they were using, because that is popular words. It should be a safe place. You know, Ananda should be a safe place. And people would just say it to each other like this was perfectly meaningful. Like, what do you mean by a safe place? What are you talking about? And finally, I grew a little weary of it, and I said, you know, I don't think Ananda should be a safe place at all. If you're talking about egoic safety, I don't think Ananda should be a place where you and your ego can just hang out forever. I think Ananda should be a place in which your ego is always under threat. Now, by that, I don't mean that you should feel tense and you should feel not loved or not supported or not understood. Of course, that's silly. But it's meant to be a place of challenge. The spiritual path is supposed to challenge everything about you. I am not a self-realized person. I don't have superconscious experiences. I'm an aspirant. Swamiji has a right to talk about these things, and he often has written, and so has Master, that just, well, it's beyond our capacity even to imagine. And Swami says the difference between being sound asleep and waking up to your ordinary life, he said, doesn't even begin to express the difference between our ordinary life and true superconscious freedom. You know, the difference between finite and infinite is infinite. And sometimes we just try to even imagine. And I remember being with Swamiji at Disneyland, of all places. Disneyland used to be much more innocent than it is now. Now I haven't been there in many years, but the last times I was there, a lot of popular culture was coming into Disneyland. But for a long time, it was its own universe, just completely separate. And that, you know, the music was innocent, everything was innocent in the best possible way. And Swami used to really enjoy going there. He also said that it was so well done, he thought it was a terrific example of karma yoga for all of us to see what it looks like when the best energy is put out. So we were there. He'd gone to Los Angeles for some kind of an event, and then we took a trip. We took a day to go to Disneyland. And we were sitting, we had gone to the sidewalk because the electric parade was about to start. I mean, this would have been in the 80s, the 70s. This would have been in the 70s. It's a long time ago. And they used to have costumed people that had lights on them, and so it was called the electric parade because it was electric lights. God knows what technology they have now. I'm sure it would look very primitive, but it was very magic at the time. So we wanted to have a good seat. So we were sort of, there was about 12 of us maybe. We were sort of standing together on the sidewalk. We were among the earliest people to gather. And suddenly Swami just shifted into this other bhav, which he didn't make a point of changing his consciousness, but every so often it would just sort of happen. And so he said, we were just looking at this crowd of people because there were hundreds of people there. And he said, imagine, he said, not merely loving all these people, but being all these people. He said that was Master's state of consciousness. And it was an amazing difference to contemplate because, you know, one's heart opens and one feels this kind of kindly regard for the whole planet. And whenever I remember this story, there were some Japanese families there with pushing their little carts with their little babies. So my picture of the people is always these Japanese people. That's the first image that comes to my mind. And you can love people. You see a mother and a father and several children, and the children are so innocent and the parents are so devoted. I mean, it's very easy for your heart to open and to feel exceedingly kindly. But then Swami took it that extra step. Imagine not merely loving these people, but actually being as much in their consciousness as you are in, well, the phrase doesn't even work anymore, you are in your own. which is to say you wouldn't just be looking at those parents, but you would be in their consciousness and feeling their love for their children and the children's love for their parents. It's just inconceivable. You don't even know where to begin. So Swami just made that statement. Then his energy just lifted, and all of us went into the bhav that Swami was in. And we were right there on the sidewalk, so we all just sat down on the sidewalk and started meditating. Swami was much younger and stronger then. It would have been unthinkable, in his 80s, but he was in his 40s. We all just sat down on the sidewalk and started meditating. And we meditated very deeply there for at least a half an hour. And the only thing that, and meanwhile the whole crowd just filled in, so when we opened our eyes about a half an hour later when the electrical parade was moving right in front of us, we were completely surrounded by people. I don't know what they thought of us, just sitting there. But that's what we're talking about. And it's not where my little feelings and my traumas and my limitations and my desires are all just comforted. Not at all. Master just says, what do you want? Do you want your small self or do you want God? What do you want? And it's interesting, the saints just take worldly people as they are. They don't judge you for being, it's just like if you're 4 years old, the parent isn't angry at the child for just being 4. Child is 4. He has a certain reality. And that reality has to be worked with. The masters look at us exactly as children, and they see us at whatever stage of growth that we're at. And what the masters ask of a 4-year-old is quite different than they would ask of someone who's 24. And so when adult children, when adults whose spiritual consciousness is still as children, the masters just bless them, that's all. Whatever they want. But if you actually say to the master, I want freedom, and you sincerely mean it, then they'll do that. They'll act accordingly, and they'll stop indulging you. There's a story about Master and one of his disciples, and I don't know who he was. Swami has mentioned his name. But Master always called him my baby. He was a grown man. Master called him my baby and said to him, I call him my baby because I'm babying him. And Swami said that the man just sort of accepted it, without any protest. He wanted to be babied. I'm calling him my baby because I'm babying him, meaning I'm not really asking of him what I could. I'm just letting him play. Swami also talks about Dayamata. Dayamatas had several siblings. I think 2 brothers and 1 sister. There were at least 4 of them. She and her sister became lifelong disciples of Master from when they were teenagers. Richard Wright, her brother, was Master's secretary and traveled with him to India. And in Autobiography of a Yogi, we have Richard Wright appears here and there. And Master had high hopes for his role, his leadership role in the organization there. He married, and he remained Master's disciple, but he picked up a different life than Master might have wanted him to. I'm out of my league when I start talking about it, but that's how I understand it. There was another brother, and I'm nearly certain I have this correct, and he came as a child, and Master tried constantly to guide him, but he never wanted to be guided. And when Master was stern with him, he would complain to his mother. And finally, whether it was Daya's brother or not, I'm nearly certain it was, but it's unimportant. Finally, Master gave him a model airplane, the little boy, and he loved the model airplane, and he grew up to be an aeronautical engineer. And it was just like Master was trying to pull him. Just because you're a child, physically a child, chronologically in your physical age a child, has nothing to do with your stage of consciousness. Your consciousness is whatever it is, whatever age body you have. To have a child's body does not give you a child's consciousness in terms of your nobility and your devotion to God. You could have been a great yogi in other lifetimes, and here you are, you're just a child at this point. So the fact that he was only a child, it was that he couldn't respond to Master in the way that Master wanted him to. So Master gave him the airplane and sent him off to be an aeronautical engineer, because that's what he could do. But if you really want transformation, and this is Swamiji's purification ceremony, I seek purification by the grace of God. That's how the ceremony is initiated, by the devotee who kneels before the light bearer, the messenger of the masters, and says, I seek purification by the grace of God. And what Swami wrote there, that the light bearer says, is, the Master says, open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. I mean, for those of us who have been participating in this very simple ceremony since 1987, when Swami created it, but every time you hear that, open your heart to me, I will enter and take charge of your life. Really? So then, Swami's writing here, sometimes disciples are startled by what that actually means. Now, most of us do not live with the Master, because the Masters don't incarnate as often as we do. Sometimes people say, I'd like to be a disciple of Master, but he's not in the body, and I want a living guru. But think about it like this. If that relationship with the guru transcends time and space, if death is no obstacle, and these are the premises of a God-realized Master, if the relationship, once it's truly formed, and I say by that, it's not enough to say, oh yeah, I think I'll be a disciple. No, once it's truly formed by a depth of commitment and sufficient willpower to make that more than an empty promise, that relationship lasts through many incarnations. And the scriptures say, in fact, once you come to your Sat Guru, once you have formed that relationship with your Sat Guru, then that Master takes you to freedom. Now, it's not quite as simplistic as that sounds, because we have a line of gurus, and we have where Jesus sends one of his disciples to Ramakrishna. So there's a certain, what I don't understand, but nonetheless, and also it's common sense. It's going to take us more than one lifetime to work this out. And attunement with one Master, attunement with a certain ray of grace, what I was trying to say is that's divinely given. It's a destiny that has to be carried out. Edgar Cayce, who was a remarkable savant, who was in the 40s and 50s, and he did past life readings for people. He would go into a trance, and he would have these superconscious perceptions. And he did past life readings for people. He did a lot of readings, and all of his work has been totally collected, because he did thousands of readings over his lifetime. And more than once he said, you were with Jesus, you were in Jerusalem, you met the Master at the Sea of Galilee, things like that. And he said at least one time to this one woman, you were on the street, Jesus looked at you. You looked him in the eye. And that, in all of your 2,000 years of incarnation since, you have been working with that experience, because it brought you to an understanding of where you were going in your life. And you've been trying to come up to that all this time. Now, where I'm saying with all of this is, The masters don't incarnate that often. Yogananda has come back multiple times. He was Arjuna, he was William the Conqueror, he said. He was Ferdinand III in Spain. He was Yogananda. He says in 200 years after his death, he died in 1952, he's going to reincarnate again, spend a lot of time in the Himalayas. So, there we are. But the number of times that the Master incarnates is many fewer than the number of times we incarnate. So that means that we're going to have many lifetimes in which our Satguru is not in the body with us. But his disciples are, and our Guru Bhais are. And the Master's presence is only as far away from us as we think it is. The opposite being true. Master said, to those who think me near, I am near. When Swami asked him, I think it was Swami, after you are gone, will you be as close to us as you are now? Master said, to those who think me near, I will be near. That has two meanings. That is one, those who draw me with their thoughts, and the other meaning would be those who have faith in my presence. So even if the Master is not there in his physical body to correct us, our Guru Bhais and our disciples are there to correct us, and also the Master is speaking through our conscience, through our own inner sense of right and wrong, through our soul memory of the advice that the Master has given to us. We can't, things that the Master says to us, that come to us, we can't work them out in one lifetime. And it's not just the words that are spoken. That's what I was saying about the disciple of Christ who had that contact. I know this from being with Swamiji. There's a change in consciousness that happens. And we all know it from the moments when it comes through. For the moments when the density is dissolved and that contact is there. Let me think for a moment. Just a second, I'm trying to. Oh yes. Swamiji, at the satsang he gave, this again would have been probably in the 70s. I think that was the era. And it was when we used to meet in what is now Crystal Hermitage, but then was just his dome. For those of you who know the building, what is the living room was the whole house. And it was partitioned off a little bit, so we didn't have quite the whole space that's there now, but we had space. And so there would be 40 people maybe maximum in the living room there. And it was very, very isolated. We didn't have electricity, had gas lights, and it still does, just looks out over this uninhabited canyon, huge canyon. And we would be there with Swami, and it would be like it was almost like a spaceship is the word I want to use. It would be just like this pod that just existed completely separate from any other reality. It was down the hill in this uninhabited area, just a few trailers and things, and when you went outside, there was no light, there was no street lights, there was nothing. So it was just this pod that was just right there like that. And we would sit with him and have these extraordinary experiences. And this was one of the nights when it was particularly elevated. And Swamiji said, when you achieve enlightenment, when that moment of liberation comes to you, he said, you look back at all your incarnations and you realize that they were all just a dream, that none of it was enduringly real. I mean, that alone, you just have to sit there and think about it. You can think just about the experiences of this life, your childhood, your romances, your heartbreak, your successes, your failure, the home you built, the business you built, the bankruptcy you filed, the heartbreak you had, the deaths that you experienced, just go through the whole thing. Imagine just looking back and seeing it was just a play of light and shadow, that it never really happened, in the sense that it was just ephemeral. You know, it seems so real, but it was just ephemeral. I mean, it already is, isn't it? We can remember, but what are we remembering? You know, I for a while in my own little office, I had this picture of myself. I was about probably 9 months old, just judging, because I was sort of propped up on my hands like this, in one of those little smock, little baby dresses like this, and hairless, big eyes, because your eyes look big when in your baby face, like this. And I was so awake and ready. I just sort of had that picture on the wall because I liked her spirit. She was really awake and ready, and it was bringing me forward. And I don't remember. My earliest memory is I had a pink and white teddy bear, and the teddy bear had a plastic kind of snout like this, and I always slept with that teddy bear, and I would chew on the snout. That's how I would fall asleep. I mean, like, how old are you when you're doing something like that? And the teddy bear, I recall, was as close to my own size, but I was really little. But I remember doing that, and I have a few other very young memories. But where is she? Where's that baby? Where's that little girl? You know, I'm still here. My consciousness is still here. When I looked at that baby picture, I saw myself. I could see her spirit, and it's the same spirit that I feel inside of me now. But where is it? And think about those devastating experiences that we had, or those exhilarating experiences that we've had. Where are they? It's an interesting question, isn't it? So Swami said, the moment, and then, okay, that's just this incarnation. What about all the ones before? I suspect you and I have had bits and pieces of intuition, occasionally something a little more valid than that really verifiable than that, because I think a lot of my intuitions are valid. But I just think about these adventures, and because I've been with the same spiritual family, I'm sure, for many incarnations, I have very complicated relationships with these people, and I can feel and remember this or feel and remember that. Where is all of that? You know, it's just a vibration in my own thoughts. But where is it? It was so tangible. So we come to this moment of liberation. We look back and we see that all of that was just ephemeral. It was just like you look at an ocean. This is the image that the masters always use. You look at the ocean, the wave goes up. I mean, you're seeing it. There it is. Whoosh, look at that wave going up like that. But then it goes down. And then it goes down into the trough, and this one comes up. And you see that one come up, and then it goes down into the trough again. I did scuba diving for a little while. I was not good at it because I could never forget that I was underwater, and that somehow I could never fully relax and enjoy myself being underwater. But I did it enough to realize how magnificent it is. And snorkeling gives you a clue, but scuba is much greater. You go down, and you are in a universe. I mean, this huge universe that's down there. And it just goes in all directions. And there's all these creatures and all these completely different rules, everything. And, you know, it's just happening. But from the surface, you don't know that. And then when you come up, all of a sudden you cross that line and you're in this other, you're back in the world where you can breathe without the tank. It's just this whole other experience, and all of this going on. It's so, let's see, the point of that was, you know, just how many different realities exist simultaneously. So finally, we get to the moment of liberation. We see that it was just, all of it was just the ocean going up, the ocean going down, the ocean going up. Where is it? It forms and then it dissipates, it forms and it dissipates. The ocean continues, but all those forms, that's what we see. Except, Swami said, The only thing that we see that is enduringly real is whenever we have touched into the infinite. Because that would be the truth, you see. We touch into that which is not just shadow and light, but is just the light, the pure light. And that's what we see, going backwards like that. Like I was on the street of Jerusalem, Jesus went by, and our eyes locked. And I felt, even as he said that, that experience that we had that night, and many times, with Swamiji, on the day of moksha, I'll remember that. Because it was real. It really happened. We shifted out of this other world. So the masters look at us, and they look at us in our hearts or, in our physical bodies, wherever we are. And they want to bring us out of the shadow and into the light. They don't want to make us comfortable in the shadow. They don't want to make us safe in the shadow. They don't want to give us all these reasons to justify the way that I feel. That's not their job. Their job is to awaken us and to make us realize that this world is not our home. And it's not a question of being in this material world. Here we are. There's an inclination that it's very complicated, because vairagya is a very powerful spiritual quality, a disinclination for the things of this world. But as Master said, it's not enough to reject this world. We have to also embrace the divine. Otherwise, as Swami wrote, suicides would all be liberated, because that is the ultimate rejection. And in fact, the opposite is true. They have to go through the difficult process of having the courage to face into this world, instead of wanting to walk away from the karma that's come to them. I'm being slightly delicate, because whenever I talk to a group, I never know who's going to be listening. And I don't want people to be discouraged by anything, or to be frightened for their friends. If you happen to know friends or people close to you who have taken their own lives. It's just karma. It's just a mistake. That's all it is. It's not an eternal damnation. It's like, oh, I thought this was a good idea, but it turns out not to be. So now I have to learn what I wasn't able to learn. So what I was saying about this world is, we have to be able to see through this world to the service of God. And it's not that we love this world, but we love the opportunity to be an instrument of light in this world. And the darker this world, the more compelling the need for instruments of light. And we need to be eager to be those instruments. A friend of mine just made this comment. She made it just sort of very casually, but it's been profoundly moving to me, the simplicity of the answer that she came to. She suffered a period of ill health. We traveled together to India at a time when we were not very conscious of the fact that one of the places we were staying, the health standards were unacceptable, and quite a few people got sick. And she came home with some kind of intestinal, whether it was parasites or I don't know what she got, but something infected her. And it made her quite ill for 7 years, which is a pretty long time. And during that time, she just had to deal with this chronic debilitating condition that just made it very difficult for her to accomplish anything. And she was has been a person of great accomplishment before and after this period. But she decided that if she wasn't going to be able to do anything worthwhile in this world, she would be here for God, as in this world where so few people loved God. She would be someone who loved God. And that would be her service. That's been a very powerful thought for me. I'll just be someone who loves God. Because you see, that's all in the end that actually matters. Because all the rest of it is we just get the wave to go up, and then the wave is going to go down. But the enduring reality behind all of that is our love for God. And our love for God is self-forgetful. I'm not even going to say self-sacrificing, because that brings on connotations that sometimes aren't the best. Just self-forgetful. We just forget the self in the contemplation of the divine. A friend of mine told me, also this is a story from India, and there was a woman saint there, not a Anandamayi Ma, but a different saint, that this woman was very, very magnetized to and spent a lot of time with her. And she was traveling in India, I think either on her own or with just one or two companions, not an organized trip. So they were very much having to take care of themselves. These were friends from Europe. I say that because sometimes the Europeans are more comfortable in India than the Americans are. But in any case, there she was, especially India. I'm talking India of 30 or 40 years ago, which was less Western than it is now. And she said they were so careful. They always knew where their passports were, where their money was. They kept track of their luggage. They were just always very, very careful so that they wouldn't get into any trouble. She said she came into this ashram, and they had all their baggage with them. They came into this ashram. She saw this teacher. She said everything she had in her hand, she just put on the floor and just walked in and sat with the teacher. And she said it was hours before she even remembered that she'd had a purse and money and passports and all these things that were so important to her. Completely went out of her mind. And, you know, eventually she vaguely remembered she had them. She went to look for them because nothing else was real except the extraordinary magnetic power of this person. Swamiji, when he talked about visiting Anandamayi Ma, the joy-permeated mother, that Master talks about in Autobiography of a Yogi. In 1958, when Swami went to India, he met Anandamayi Ma, and over the next 4 years, he spent a great deal of time with her. And he was visiting her, and he had some responsibilities because he was there representing SRF and representing Master, and he was there, and he had to leave because he had some program he had to give, maybe in the same town, I don't know. But he had to leave to catch a train. And Ma was on the porch. She'd come out to say goodbye to him. And Swami just finally said to her, as long as you're standing there, I can't leave. And he wasn't being poetic. He was just saying, it's not possible for me to motivate myself to be anywhere but here as long as you're standing there. So she laughed and she said, all right then. And she went inside and closed the door, and he ran and caught the train. But it was just reality versus unreality. Now, all that sounds so beautiful to us. It sounds just so attractive, at least it does to many of us, until the Master starts untying the knots and cutting the ties and ripping out the attachments. And then all of a sudden it doesn't look so good to us. You know, like really, of course, Lord, I'll give you everything, absolutely everything, but not that, you know? So we have to really, very, very deeply, and I'm going to use the phrase practice when it's easier. We have to just constantly work with ourselves. What is the most important thing to me? Every decision, the wonderful fun thing about the spiritual path, especially, and I have to say this, the way Swamiji and Master have brought it to us. It covers everything. It's just every aspect of your life. Swamiji has written books about most of the important areas of life: artistic self-expression, personal relationships, raising children, dealing with money, being a leader, working with your emotions, secrets of emotional health, you know, affirmations and prayers. It's just for healing. I mean, he touches it all. And he works with your psychology in a way that helps your self-realization and doesn't just cause you to want to carve out a safe space where nobody really challenges you. He's draconian. Many of the things he suggests, they're draconian. There's just nothing around it. I recently had an exchange with someone. The specific subject was not so much the issue. They had us. I had said some things and given some programs, making certain strong statements that were actually the things that Swami Kriyananda himself said. But they were strong statements. And this person didn't want me to make such strong statements, and he had it all worked out. Well, these people over here, you know, they're sensitive if you say that. And I said, I didn't say it, Swami said it. You know, it wasn't even like I didn't even translate it. I read it. It was his own words. This is what Swami said. Well, it makes them uncomfortable. They have a different point of view. My response finally was, well, they're going to have to get over it, aren't they? I mean, what can we do? Swamiji and Master did a lot of things that were just way outside of what I was ready to understand. And you have two choices. You either reject what he said and cling to what you already believe, or you at least open to the possibility that there's something here for me to learn. I mean, Swami was so forceful, and it scared me. I wouldn't have used the word scared at the time, but that's the right word for it. It just scared me because I didn't feel safe. You know, I didn't want, I think here's what I didn't want. I wanted God. I wanted to advance spiritually, but I also wanted this and this and this and this. You know, there were a lot of things. I was hoping I could have it all. And for a certain time, I thought I could. You know, I get to grow and be a big spiritual person, but I also don't have to be made too uncomfortable. And he would just make categorical statements about the nature of life, the nature of the world, the nature of worldly life, the nature of people's attitudes, just like this. And I couldn't stand it. But I was trapped because I absolutely trusted Swamiji. I knew he wouldn't lie to me. I just knew what he told me was the truth. But I couldn't comprehend the worldview that he was presenting to me. I just wanted more cotton candy. I wanted more Cinderella. You know, I just wanted more fantasy. And he wasn't going to give it to me. So I developed a habit which worked really well, actually, which is I didn't reject it. I didn't dare reject it. But I didn't accept it either, which is good. Swami himself said he accepted everything Master said unhesitatingly, but not unquestioningly. Meaning, and Swami put it another way to me personally, I prefer an honest argument to a mindless yes. Because it doesn't really serve anything to just say you believe it when every part of you is rebelling against it. That's what I mean about if we're trying to hide from something, sooner or later it just blows up anyway, so what's the point? But I didn't want to say no because I wanted to remain open, but I couldn't say yes either. So I developed in my mind, for a while I lived in this dome at Ananda Village, and domes are marvelous in certain ways, but simple things like closets are hard to deal with because the walls are all curved. So in this closet, there was just this impossible corner of the closet that was completely useless for anything that you use more than once every 4 or 5 years. That's where I put a lot of what Swami said. I just packaged it up very nicely in little closed boxes, and I would just put it mentally in that corner of the closet. And I have to say, over the years, every single thing he ever said has proven true to me. But I had to have a lot more experience before it became true for me. But the drasticness of it, you see, it wasn't he was being drastic at me. It wasn't like, 1 meal a day, 4 hours of sleep a night. wasn't that kind of drastic. The drastic was in the gradual realization of what it really means to give your life to God. And the ever deepening realization that there is no alternative. That it's not like you can carve out your own compromise on this. You know, I wouldn't have said that's what I was doing. I wasn't clear enough to know that. But as years passed, I realized that's what I was doing. It was just like sort of more subconscious than conscious. It's just like, yeah, but I'm also going to get to keep this, and I'm going to get to keep this, and, you know, it's all right. And this is how Sister Gyanamata put it in one of her letters. It's just so powerful. And I'm going to misquote it, but this is the sense of it. It's become, I've translated it half into my own language, but it's her sentiment, which is, you know, gradually she came to realize that even those things that were right, that were right in themselves, and that hurt no one, even those had to be surrendered. So it wasn't like you just have to give up the bad things. You have to give up everything. Because everything that you're holding is a vibration. And now you see, this is where it gets so fascinating. It's a vibration is what it is. It's not a thing. You know, God realization is just a vibration. This is why they say the astral world is right here. We think of the astral world as being somewhere else, maybe near Bali or by Mumbai or something like that. I mean, in our minds, I'm from California, so it's like it exists, but it's far away. It's like I have to transfer myself somewhere else. But the masters say that it is right here. It's just a different vibration. And because we don't resonate on that vibration, we don't see it. Because it's non-material, it's just a vibration. God is present. It's not like he's, you know, it's not like he's on a train and he's going to arrive in a few years, or is somewhere near Bali and you have to, you know, you have to get on the airplane to get there. The divine is absolutely as much with us now as it will ever be. However, I'm not experiencing that. I'm not experiencing that because my vibration is different and I can't merge with it. I mean, what happens to us when we sit in really deep meditation? Or we're in a satsang or a ceremony or in a concert or something where something really happens and our self changes. You just feel, you enter another dimension, literally. And for a time at least, you perceive differently. And you just feel differently. And it's you, it's yourself. It's just that for that period of time, your vibration has changed. But to really be free, we have to change our whole vibration. And anything we're holding on to, that's a vibration of, I need something else. I want something else. You know, I want to be myself. I want to be this person. I want to have this child, this support, this whatever. This healthy body, this youth, this blah, blah, whatever it is. It's a vibration, and it's a vibration to that extent. We can't meld with the vibration of the infinite. That's why she said everything had to go. Even those things that were harmless in themselves, but by holding on to them, you keep your vibration, a certain vibration of consciousness, and it all has to pass through you. Everything has to pass through you. Now, I can't take it farther than that because I haven't been there. But what it tells us is just exactly what the Gita verse, which we started an hour ago, you know, this is like, the true self is not friendly to the false self. And the false self is everything, everything else, except the true self. Now, this little tiny bit, and I'm going to stick on this for just a moment before I progress. When I was back there talking about suicides, and talking about, see, because the saints are very, very joyful, and they see the misery of this world far more than the rest of us see it, because they are everyone, and they feel the tumultuous sort of chaos of ordinary human consciousness, and the pain and the disappointment. And it's not even that everybody's miserable, it's that the perfect happiness that is their true nature, by contrast, the misery is there compared to what they could be. It's just like when, well, if you see anyone there, you're sort of sitting over in the corner when there's a beautiful room over here. You're eating cold porridge outside when you could come in and have this marvelous dinner. You might not know that the porridge is terrible. It's just that this is really who we really are. So there's this constant challenge in the midst of this world to see the world for what it really is, but then see the divine behind it. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who has, captured the imagination of people of our age, of our times, so beautifully, and was great in her way, in her divine way. A great child of God. In some interview I saw with her, they were filming her, and she was literally picking dying people up off the street and bringing them into her home of the dying. She would pick up beggars and poor people, and there was this, horrible maggot-infested person who just was literally dying in the gutter. And she's right with them, with her hands on him and close to him and picking up his body. And, it was repulsive to the ordinary human consciousness. And she sort of, as I recall it, sort of looked up to the camera and said essentially, you see a maggot-infested beggar. I see the face of Christ. And that's how you do it. But how do you get there? Well, 1 minute at a time. That's all. But the part of that is exactly what the Gita is saying. You just have to realize that it's life or death, and there's no compromise. You don't have to get there to all, you don't, okay, here's what I want to say. You have two realities that you have to follow on the spiritual path. You have to accept reality, and this is something also that people find very hard to do. This is my limit. This is the most I can do. There was a friend of mine, she had this exchange of letters with Swami. There was a person she had to deal with very closely in her work, and she found him really awful. And he was awful inherently, and he was also, well, she put it, he had a genius for understanding what your weak points were and exploiting them. Because even in an ashram, these things happen. He derived his power by making you feel inferior. And it was a very complicated karma that played itself out for a long time. So she wrote to Swami about, saying to Swami she didn't really think this person was suitable for the position they had, or she was, I'm not sure exactly how she wrote, but she was telling Swamiji about some difficulty she was having. Swami wrote back and said, oh, he just wants to be your friend. And she honestly wrote back, his friend? She writes with a big, exclamation point. I don't even want to be in the same room with him. And it was just like, that's it. Yes, of course. Someday I'm going to have to see the face of Christ in this person, and I'm going to have to become immune to the way he expresses his egoic delusions, but not today. Right now I'm not going to be in the same room with him. That's just basically the way it is. So on one hand, we have to be very realistic about ourselves, because if we wind ourselves up too tight, push ourselves too hard, try too much to be something that we're not. I remember a friend of mine, there was a certain very austere instruction in Master's teachings. You know, the kind of thing like sleep, no food, or whatever it was. It was very strict. And my friend was making themselves crazy following it. I mean, really, almost literally crazy. And they said, sort of like, what are you doing? Well, Master says we're supposed to do this. And I said, it never occurred to me that that teaching applied to me. It just never crossed my mind, because there was just no chance. There was also no chance that this person could do it either, but there was no chance that I could do it. So it's just like, why would I even think about that? It would be presumptuous of me to take that practice on, because I'm not that good. That's just a simple fact. Now, the temptation, when you have to admit that, is to try to bring the teaching down. Well, what I'm doing is just as good. This is also important. And this is what I was talking about when I was saying people were using psychology in an unhelpful way. Well, you know, it's very important to also have a sense of self and have your own way and then be able to do what you feel is right. Well, yes and no. If those same words can be spoken in a way that's helpful, but they can also be a way of just trying to bring the teaching down to something I'm more comfortable with. Because I'm just not willing to admit that I have all these desires and I'm not capable of giving them up. You know, it's just, this is who I am. I'm sincere, I will be free, I will be better, but I'm not going to do that today. That's just the way it is. So the way I say it to people is, you have to leave the mountaintop as high as the mountain is, and then just sort of see where you fit on it and work with where you are. And you're going up the mountain. But if you bring the mountaintop down to where you're standing, what will happen to you then? You know, first of all, it puts you at odds with the guru, which is not usually a good idea. And also it's like, what will you aspire to? What I love about this teaching is that you're busy all the time. When I first came here, which was when I was 24, I'd already run through a few things that were supposed to last longer than they lasted. So when I embraced this way of life, I had my fingers crossed. But I didn't know, because I was a quick study. I had this sharp, strong mind, and it had gotten me through things too fast. Faster than I wanted to have gotten through them, meaning that I just seen through them. They had ceased to serve me. And it was genuine. That wasn't just arrogance, that was a fact. I just tried like that and could figure it out. So when I got to this one, I just hoped, and of course it's far surpassed any imagination I ever had, and it just keeps me busy every day. There's not 1 minute of the day, there's not any circumstance of life that isn't an absolute fertile field for God realization, for God communion, and for personal development. So we want to always keep it like that. We want to keep it so much bigger than what we already are, that every day we can just have something to do and never just sort of suddenly get bored. Like, what am I going to do? I have to find some other way to inspire myself, you know? So there you have it, friends. That was 6-6, worth remembering. So let's now go to 6-7. The tranquil sage who has conquered the lower egoic self abides ever in the supreme self. He views with equanimity all the dualities, cold and heat, pleasure and pain, praise and blame. Next comes number 6-8. That yogi who is blissfully absorbed in the wisdom of the self is known as being unshakably united into spirit, unchangeable, the controller of his senses. He views with equal mind a clod of earth, a stone, and a bar of gold. And 6-9, he is a supreme yogi who gazes equally upon patrons, friends, enemies, strangers, peacemakers, those who cause trouble, relatives, the virtuous, and the ungodly. So all three of these verses are talking about the dualities and how when we are anchored in the one, the dualities disappear. Cold and heat, pleasure and pain, praise and blame. A clod of earth, a stone, a bar of gold. Visualize that. A clod of earth, a stone, a bar of gold. Now, the average person is going to see that these have different values to me, and that one of them I'm going to cherish and the other two I'm not going to worry about. The yogi, who is blissfully absorbed in the wisdom of the self, just looks at them and says, what difference does any of this make? Now, even just sit with that for a moment. It's like, what state of consciousness would you be in and that you would feel that way? I've not had, I've always been comfortable. I've always had everything I want in my life. I've never had to really struggle. So I don't really know what that feels like. But I've also, my family was, relatively speaking, not very materialistically oriented. You know, it was just never part of our values. But I remember I was actually sitting in this house, and there's a closet that's built under a stairwell here. So it goes back in a little bit. You can walk into it and kind of crawl around in it a bit. And I have no idea what even prompted it. But one day I was sitting in this living room and this wave came over me, and I had this tremendous desire to fill that closet with gold. And I had this picture in my mind of myself being able to open the door of that closet and then stand there, and there would be all this gold in my closet. And it just like was some shred of a memory or something that I read in a book or a past life as a king. I don't know what it was, but it was very real. And as amusing as it was to me, it was also very instructive. You know, just because it's not anything in this life that I've felt like that. I know some people are born and they have this real need to, you know, get a good job, get a good savings account, whatever it might be. I just never thought of those things. But then I did. I just could feel the urge to make yourself rich and secure, things of the world. So it helped me. I mean, it helped me. Everything helps to understand what the power of that temptation is. So there you are, a clod of earth, a stone, and a bar of gold. Just try to think, who would I have to be? What would my consciousness need to be for me to really just feel, well, what difference does it make? And not just like some secret, I get to keep it anyway, because now I've said that I'm equal, but just really not have any need to put that bar of gold away somewhere just in case. And of course, what are we knowing then? We're knowing that this is like the earth chakra. Where does our security come from? Does our security come from our relationship to the divine? From our, to be blissfully absorbed in the wisdom of the self? Or are we going to be blissfully absorbed once we have enough gold in that closet? As long as I have that gold in the closet, then I can just be so free all the time. You know, would we really feel that way? And then also the other dualities above, cold and heat, pleasure and pain, praise and blame. You know, we think we're just like, praise, who needs it? Who cares if people misunderstand? And then once again, we have life experience. Like, and someone really doesn't understand you and mistreats you and speaks ill of you or doesn't support what you're trying to do, doesn't appreciate your contribution. And all of a sudden this little child inside this childlike feeling of sadness and abandonment comes over us because people don't really appreciate who I am and how hard I try and how much I work and, you know, whatever you want to say. Praise and blame, pleasure and pain. It's like this whole planet, especially this American country, is like good equals ease and pleasure. That's just, that's what good is, ease and pleasure. Our whole society is, we've become like that. Duty, self-sacrifice, service, it means nothing. Now, ease and pleasure, that's what we think about. But that's just folly. So think about it, pain and pleasure, just being the same. Swami wrote to us from India in the last years of his life, in the last decade of his life, when his consciousness became really free. And he had lots of different medical experiences. And I think this was the time when he had his gallbladder removed, and he also had a cancerous tumor in his intestine somewhere. And he went to the hospital, and they, Swami used the phrase, ripped his guts out, which was not, he didn't usually use such graphic or sort of such inelegant language. But he talked about just going to the hospital and having the operation, and how he genuinely felt that it was all the same to him, whether he was going to the hospital to have his guts ripped out, or whether he was on his way to have an elegant dinner somewhere. It was all the same to him. Just as this is what is happening now, this is what God is giving to me to experience, so why would I want anything else? Now, we can think of a lot of reasons why we would want something else, but see, this is where I mean, we can say that this is how I feel and this is why I feel this way. And in this sense, this is where psychology can help spirituality. It doesn't do you any good to suppress what you feel. Even in the Gita, it says that. Krishna says to Arjuna, of what avail is suppression? I mean, what that means is, how will it serve you to suppress what you feel? To merely suppress something is not the same as transcending it, you see. You can suppress it so that you look good, and you're following the form of what it would look like to be indifferent to pleasure and pain, to praise and blame. But if, in fact, all we are doing is suppressing, let's use praise and blame, our deep despair and disappointment that people don't really understand me, we have just suppressed it so that we can hold the right face and say the right words and look the right way. But we haven't transcended anything. We've just crushed it, and it's down there festering in the dark. And sooner or later, whatever's festering in the dark is going to get strong and powerful and come forward and eat us. This is what I was saying right at the beginning about, if people come onto the spiritual path because they're hoping to avoid the work and the effort of truly transcending, and hope they can just suppress and skip over to here. I'm just going to pretend this is what I want, act like this is what I want, and then maybe all that other stuff will just go away. Instead of really saying, look, this is how I feel. Now, I don't admire these qualities in myself. I don't wish to hold them for an endless period of time, but this is how I feel. Of what avail suppression? Won't do me any good. This is how I feel. I'm angry. I'm upset about this. This is what I am. But it's not who I aspire to be, and I'm keeping the top of the mountain. I know I will be able to overcome this, just not today. And this is where you have to not only say, I want to be free, you have to also say, I want to be free, because I may not be ready to really give this up, but I want to give this up. And that's genuine. That's a sincere desire. Help me come to the point where I'm willing to do it, because I know I'm not right now. Because when you put it in front of me, I'm going to reach for the bar of gold. And that gold can be, well, pleasure and pain is where it comes. This is pleasurable, this is painful, I want the pleasurable one. But Swamiji Swamiji was just, whatever Divine Mother wants is what I want. And he would never let us, even for a moment, like say anything, or like why, I remember Seva said once, why does Divine Mother treat you that way? Swami said, I accept whatever Divine Mother sends. Don't ever say that. Don't criticize what Divine Mother sends me. Whatever she sends me is exactly what is right. I said once, when he was having a whole series of very great difficulties, and he had some small thing, I think it was literally, he went to the dentist and he didn't need any fillings. And I said, thank the Lord for little favors, which is just a stupid phrase that people say. And he said, absolute serious, I thank God for everything. Just like even he wouldn't even allow it in the lightest way to be spoken. It was just too important. Whatever God sends. Now think about that. And don't feel discouraged about it. Don't feel like, oh, I'm never going to get there. Not at all. Just realize the difference between transcendence and suppression. And don't suppress, because it won't help you. It will avail you nothing. But realize, I haven't yet transcended. Transcended means, just think about everything that you no longer really want to do. Take very simple examples. I'll use vegetarianism as one. It's not a discipline for me not to eat steak. In fact, there's this thing called Beyond Meat now, which is this thing that looks a great deal like meat. And I share a house and I share a kitchen, and some of my vegetarian friends have brought that in. And I know that it's not really bloody, it's actually beet juice, But the thing looks so much like a hamburger. And I mean, I couldn't even swallow it. I took a little bite of it, but I just couldn't. It seems so much like meat to me that I couldn't get my mind to believe that it wasn't, and I just spit it out. I mean, I fully confess that that's silly. However, you see, there's no effort required on my part. It's not like I have to, just like I desperately want to, have a steak dinner, but I can't have it because it's not right. Nothing like that. It's effortless. So all of us, and I'm just using this random example, all of us have things. It's effortless. You couldn't make me do that for anything in the world, whatever it might be. Imagine if that's how you felt about the clod of clay, the stone, and the bar of gold. That it would be just as repellent to you to grab for that gold as it is to fill in the blank. Whatever it is that you've learned just isn't going to give you happiness. See, that's the turn that we're looking for, and this is why what the Guru gives us is so drastic. Because we're not asking to just kind of spruce it up and be nice and kind of look good or anything like this. It's a complete revolution in our consciousness. As Swami writes in The Path about Master, he said, Master was so charming, so loving, so just wonderful in so many ways, such a true friend. There was so much joy in his company that many people, Swami writes words like this, failed to appreciate how drastic was the revolution to which he was calling us. In other words, it's not just to be happy together. It's to totally and completely become another reality. Imagine not merely loving all these people, but actually being as much in their consciousness as we are in our own. I have contemplated that for decades, that phrase, and it's just even like, how does it work that you can be in everybody's consciousness as much as you are in your own? It's just like, I'm so much myself. When I used to live with the nuns at Ananda village for the first 10 years of my spiritual life, and we used to meditate together most mornings, and it was the same group of women for years. We would meditate together, and we were so close. There was such a strong energy with us, and I used to joke, but it was only half a joke. We would go into, we had a little teepee was our temple. We'd go into that temple together. We'd sit down in the early morning. We'd meditate together. The energy would become so strong. And I would sort of wonder, how do Why is it that I always walk out with my own consciousness? Why is it that I don't accidentally become somebody else? You know, why is it, what is it that just anchors me so appallingly to this individuality? Now, of course, I can give you all the metaphysics of it. I know what all the masters say, but there's a mystery to it. You know, that whatever it is that binds us to our limitations. And then just even as an idea, to imagine what it would be like if all of that dissolves. And realize, and this is the part of it, when Swamiji was there with Master, and like 1948, 49, and Master had Swami grow a beard. And at that time, almost no one in America had beards. Fidel Castro was the most famous bearded character. And Swamiji said sometimes when he'd walk down the street in Los Angeles, people would sort of, you know, children, Fidel Castro, because he had a beard. That was the only reason that made him look like that. But because of that, a Masonic lodge was doing some kind of an initiation, and they wanted to have a tableau. And they wanted to have someone represent the figure of Jesus praying at the rock of temptation. So Swamiji, and Swami doesn't say this, but I'm sure also his vibration of spirituality, in addition to his beard, was what caused them to invite him. So he played the part of Jesus on the rock, and he said Swami makes light of it, but you know, every so often he would sigh deeply with the effort of the prayer, and that's all he did. And so afterwards, Master asked him, well, you know, how did it go? And Swami said, well, it went fine. He said, but I'd much rather be Jesus Christ than merely look like him, meaning the beard. And he said, Master's response totally shocked him, Swami said. Master just said, oh, that will come. Just like that. Oh, that will come. You'd like to be Jesus Christ? Oh, good. Yeah, you will be. And because that's how Master saw it. It was just that simple. You will be. The promise of the Gita will be fulfilled in you. And yes, he was talking to Swamiji, who was a highly advanced soul. But he would have said the same to anyone. Because you see, time is an illusion. All of this is just light and shadow. The only thing that's eternally true is when we touch into the spirit. And when we step into that reality, all of this just ceases to exist. It's not merely that it becomes unimportant, it simply ceases to exist. It never was, because it never was. We were never separated. We never went through that really. We just lost sight of what was really happening. So, my friends, God bless you.